continue in our series about cryptocurrencies with a presentation about ICO, because in fact ICO have been more or less in the news during the last half of 2017. And well, what kind of news? For instance, if I look at the volume of ICO's issuances, there have been more than $3.5 billion collected through ICOs during 2017, starting almost in April. Although there have been some prehistoric ICOs in 2015 and 2016, the volumes were very low, and the phenomenon appeared in last April. So not only I, but people think it's relevant to think about regulating ICO, because there have been some individual scams, which means people which have been scammed, or they have had their money stolen through ICO schemes. So that is the micro level. Plus, there is a bubble around cryptocurrencies, bubble which is busting apparently, but this is more a macro issue. It's not just about people trying to extort money from some other people, but it's a macro phenomenon. So all these problems make it clear that regulation is needed. And by regulation, I mean, shall we forbid ICO, or shall we find some ways to make them useful? So it seems that there are no more information since December. If you look at the picture I just shown you, which comes from the coinschedule.com website, there are no longer information added to the website since the beginning of December, as if the ICO stopped. And moreover, there have been some significant legal hurdles coming from the US Securities and Exchange Commission, especially at the beginning of December. Munchie, which was a company which was trying to do an ICO, according to the SEC press release, which you can access by clicking the link, this company refunded the investors before any tokens were delivered. That is to say, they started an ICO and they stopped it during the preliminary process. Before anything was done, in fact, they gave back the money to the investors. And so from this point, it seems that ICO do no longer exist. So I found another site which claims that there is a certain volume of ICO. So it seems that there have been more than 500 million in US dollars collected through ICOs in January, after more than $1 billion US in December. But all these figures are not certified. They are just declared by the people who run the ICO. So we don't know whether these figures are reliable or not. So this is at heart of the problem, which is how shall we or can we regulate these ICOs? And in fact, there was in France there was a call for consultation from the French Autorité des Marchés Financiers, which means Financial Markets Authority, which in late October asked the public to answer a call about several questions in order to understand what the public thinks about the ICOs. So the research group I'm working with, which is called the LABEX REFI, which is a laboratory of excellence about financial regulation, we formed a small working group in order to answer the consultation, and I would like to introduce you to the answer we gave to the consultation, which is the paper I sent you, by the way. So first, of course, I shall explain what ICO means, because I've been talking about ICO without giving any explanation. So maybe most of you know what this is all about, but I must at least repeat that initial coin offering is coined on initial public offering, and initial public offering, of course, is the operation by which stocks of companies are sold to investors before being traded on exchange. So initial public offering means issuance of stocks, and in all cases, it's not about initial public offerings of shares, but of public offering of coins, of course digital coins, such as bitcoins, not bitcoins because they are released through mining, but new digital coins are released via these initial coin offering procedures. But there is, of course, a strong difference between ICO and IPO, which is that IPO in most countries is associated with very strong regulations, which means there must be a prospectus which gives information about the process. There must be an originator, there must be a sponsor, etc. So everything is regulated and of course supervised or at least overwatched by market authorities. And of course this is not at all the case for ICOs, which happen in a kind of nowhere land because they happen into the cyberspace. So there is no regulation authority, and in fact no two ICOs offer the same information disclosure to the potential investors. So we're more or less into the far west, the wild west of financial cyberspace. So for me it is more convenient to talk about token sales rather than ICOs, because ICOs remind of IPOs, and while IPOs are regulated, ICOs are not. So token sales, of course, is a term which is less likely to be confused with something else. It's a term which is less likely to lead to a delusion about what is really happening. So that's why I will be talking now about token sales, okay? So by token sales, I mean the sale of digital tokens which are supposed to fund a project. And this is why sales are issued. You buy these tokens, and with the money, the project holder can fund the project he's advertising through the token sale. The nature of token, I mean the properties which these tokens offer, can vary across projects. So there are what we call utility tokens, which have money-like features. And in fact, these utility tokens are supposed to buy utilities which will be offered by the project. So they are more or less vouchers. Okay? You buy the digital voucher, and then you can redeem the voucher in order to access the service which will be offered by the project. There are then community tokens, which, for instance, which mainly offers voting rights into the project. Because the project can be, very far away from being achieved or completed, so decision will be taken in the history of the project, and so the people who want to take part into this decision can buy the tokens, and every token enables the token holder to be part of the future decisions. There are also security tokens which offer security-like properties, especially future returns. But of course, this typology is not exclusive, because most tokens combine properties of either utility and security, or security and community, etc. For instance, tokens that mimic shares, stocks, they are both security tokens because they will offer some future dividends, and on the other hand, they offer voting rights to the project, just like any common stock. So they are at the same time security and community tokens. Moreover, this distinction or this typology has no legal existence. It's only to describe what is happening with these digital tokens. Okay, there are many cases, and for this reason, it's quite difficult to think of a general, all-encompassing regulation of all these tokens. Moreover, tokens are usually embedded into a protocol which allocates the property rights of these tokens. For instance, think of Bitcoin and of the blockchain. The blockchain is the protocol, and when you own a Bitcoin, it means that you have some rights on something in the blockchain, but basically the right you have is the right to use the blockchain to send some orders to the blockchain, whatever the value of the token itself. The token opens the right to use that protocol, and in fact, the real rights that the protocol will give to you will depend on the way other users will use the protocol themselves. Okay, so it seems that the tokens, just as the Bitcoin, has no value in itself, but it has a value of as a right to use a protocol which is used supposedly or hopefully by other users. Shall I give some examples? Because it may be clearer if I give you some examples. So the first example of an ICO which was made in France is the ICO which was made by Dom Raider. And Dom Raider is a company that was founded 5 years ago, and as its name more or less implies, Dom is about domain names. Domain names are the name of the websites. Okay? And so Dom Raider is a radar for domain names. So the company from the beginning has been targeting domain names with a high value. For instance, domain names that describe things, okay, such as computers.com, or which mimic the name of someone which is well known, such as BarackObama.com. And in fact, they target those domain names in order to buy them once they become available from internet. Okay. So in the beginning of Dom Raider, they raised some money through private equity, and they only succeeded in raising 4 million euros, which were required to pay their computer specialist in order to code an algorithm that could identify and purchase domain names of high value once they expire. Okay, so they did this, but they could not expand anymore because in fact they consumed all the money they got from business angels, from venture capital. But in 2017 they decided to go public, not through an initial public offering procedure, just as a normal company, but through an ICO, where they would be issuing utility tokens that would give the right to use their service, which is either buy the domain names or use their auction system to sell your own domain name, okay? Or buy a pool of domain name and then use the auction system to sell them to other customers. So they decided to send these tokens, which are vouchers that can be used, that can be redeemed to use their services. So the nature of the tokens in this case is quite clear. Those tokens are vouchers. And the main product Dom Raider was advertising was the database, the data set of all the domain names they bought so far. So the ICO was advertised with a full list of domain names which were available and which could be bought then with the vouchers. So the ICO brought $35 million worth of cryptocurrencies, but once it was over, in the time where the auditor had to certify the anti-money laundering status of every investor, because the owner of Dom Raider wanted every single investor to be checked from an anti-money laundering point of view to be sure that the money was clean. Okay, so by the time the auditor has been scanning and doing due diligence about every single investor, the value of those cryptocurrencies has risen because of the rise of the Bitcoin during 2017. So once the process was complete, the founders, or the issuer, had more than 54 million euros in cryptocurrencies. So the funny thing is that while they could only raise 4 million euros in 4 years using private equity, they could raise 14 times as much in only 2 weeks of ICO. So you see why ICO is interesting. It means that once you have a good project, you can attract money extremely quickly and large amount of money. Bonjour, bonjour, je vous en prie. Yes, it is. I'm sorry, the place is a bit difficult to access, but hopefully you find it. You found it. So I was explaining, I was giving two examples of what ICOs are. So it seems that Tom Reid has been overly prudent because there is of course no legal requirement to scan the investors for AML compliance, of course, and many other ICOs, such as IX.EC, which was one of the largest ICO in France to date, they did not do that due diligence about the anti-money laundering requirements of the investors. And if I take the example of IX.EC, they only relied on blockchain, which means that what they said is that as people invested bitcoins into their ICO, bitcoins are perfectly traceable. You can track bitcoins through the Bitcoin blockchain, so there is no need for such AML requirements. We will discuss this a bit later. So a second example of an ICO is precious because, in fact, it shows how ICO could finance very large-scale projects, but also what problem it can pose. So Tezos, you probably heard about Tezos. Tezos was created by a team of French engineers around Arthur Brightman, which is a graduate of the most prestigious French engineer university, and a former high-frequency trader with Goldman Sachs. So this guy, Arthur Brightman, has a reputation for being a genius, and in fact, his project was to build a general-purpose cybercurrency which was supposed to patch the shortcomings of Bitcoin, but not just Bitcoin, all proof-of-work-based cryptocurrency, which in fact have two specific shortcomings. One is energy consumption, and the other one is governance. So I won't go into the details, neither of the shortcomings of proof-of-work cryptocurrencies on the one hand, nor of Tezos on the other hand, because Tezos is far from being complete. So in order to fund the further development, Brightman and his team decided to go public through an ICO, and they gathered more than $200,000 million worth of Bitcoins and Ether. But the problem is that they have been so far, the story is lasting for more than 6 months. In fact, the money was collected by a foundation which was supposed to invest foundation into IT projects supporting the whole Tezos ecosystem. And what happened is that the guy which was appointed to be the head of the foundation took the money for himself. And now the foundation is completely blocked because the guy wants to pay himself a salary while the people of Tezos, they don't agree. So the Swiss authority, which is in charge of the foundations, is supposed to intervene in order to do something, but nothing happens. And so the money that has been collected is, at the moment, completely sterile. So this is a nice example of why ICOs can go wrong. Because it seems that the legal framework is not, at the moment, is not good enough for the governance of the proceedings of the result of the issuance. Plus, of course, there can be scams, and well, this is something I won't go in. This is a kind of example I won't go into detail, but there are some scams which have been pinpointed by the SEC in the US, for instance. So, given all these problems, one can ask whether ICOs are desirable or not. Okay, so it can be thought that ICOs are only, one more examples of cryptocurrencies, and we already have enough of cryptocurrencies, and moreover, we can ask why there should be a specific procedure to issue cryptocurrency. Moreover, it seems that if you try to cache cryptocurrency before they are widely used, it looks more or less like Ponzi. So it's something people are dubious about. But the purpose of this paper is not to discuss the properties of the cryptocurrency which will be created or issued through the ICO. The purpose of this paper is only to think of token sales considered as a means to finance projects, and more precisely, because it seems to be the case, innovative IT projects. Okay. So my question is only whether token sales can be a desirable way of funding a project. The answer could be that token sales provide a truly disintermediated financing. And by providing a truly disintermediated financing, they lower the financing cost. So if we go back to the example I gave you, and especially the Tezos example, in the case of Tezos, the IT team of Tezos, they designed a smart contract on the Ethereum blockchain. It means that the financing vehicle was simply a piece of code which was made by the project holder themselves. So for this reason, we can say that there is no intermediary at all. So when there is no intermediary, you can of course lower the transaction cost and lower the financing cost. Plus, what we can think is that not only are intermediary costly because they need to be paid, but they also are regulated. And because they are regulated, there can be a specific regulatory cost which is usually borne by the intermediary. And excusez-moi, I do have a little computer problem. So there is usually a compliance cost which is borne by the intermediary, and if you get rid of the intermediary, you also get rid of the regulation, and hence of the regulation cost. So there are at least two reasons to think that ICOs can lower the cost of financing, although no empirical research at the moment reliably compare the funding cost via token sales and via alternate funding channels. So this is an entirely a priori argument, and we have no idea of whether it's relevant or no a posteriori, I mean empirically. So all we can say is that all other things being equal, token sales remove the financial intermediaries and thus should provide equal or lower financing costs. So for this reason, it seems useful at least to see whether there are some whether we could try to use or whether we could make legal the initial coin offering. In order to go further, or we try to put this statement, which is all other things being equal, ICOs should lower the financing cost. We shall try to put it into to implement it, because when we say all other things being equal, this is a purely logical statement, a purely logical assumption which has no empirical meaning. Because of course, from a practical point of view, as soon as we create a new financing option, we disturb the other things. Because people will try to use that new financing option and they will not use the other ways, and this will change the relative cost of the financing solutions. Moreover, if we think of token sales, the problem is that basically it seems that all the other financing options are strongly regulated, while token sales can somewhat evade regulation, or at least the regulation is uncertain. So it is very difficult to think all other things being equal, because in fact, apart from the logical assumption, it seems that in real life, other things cannot be equal. So what we recommend is, of course, regulation, but with the idea that legislators should adopt a slow pace and only regulate the most compelling aspects, as things are likely to evolve in the future on the one hand, and as things are not settled at the moment. This is probably what is happening in the US, for instance, because while China and Korea have been extremely strongly regulating, they said no, they simply forbid the ICOs. It seems that in the US, you see that the process is to talk, to let people talk, and at the moment not to issue rules. So in real life, if we want to translate the principle of, and by principle I mean all other things being equal, okay? If we want to translate that principle into real world constraints, it means that we must think of local constraints because token sales are dependent on local factor, I mean on local legal system. And of course, we must take into account every legal system when we think of implementing token sales. So we must start from what do exist. So currently in most jurisdictions, there are strong legal provisions for most financial activities, and we cannot, of course, think of any legal system in the world when we think of tokens, while there is this problem, which is that basically, as we are talking about cyberspace, there is no special location. So in order to be exhaustive, we shall think of how to implement these token sales in every possible jurisdiction, which we cannot. So we're facing a paradox, and we must rely or fall back to some specific legal system, okay? So our decision was to try to think of one given jurisdiction, which is basically France, because we're answering the Autorité des marchés financiers call for consultation on the other hand. Plus, we must start with an example, okay, and try to be as precise as possible with one given example. So what we think first is that at the moment, tokens, they do not fit into regulatory regulatory sales. So they do not fit into any peculiar regime. So there is some regulatory uncertainty. Okay, and regulatory uncertainty is of course a deterrent to investment because people are frightened. They don't want to invest when they don't know what will happen with their investment. This is probably one reason why the ICO have been slowing down somewhat in the US because the Securities and Exchange Commission has been making some strong statements saying that the regulation is not certain, that ICOs might fall under the regulation of securities law as general investment products, but there is no certainty about this, and time will tell, etc. So they have been issuing some statement of uncertainty in order to cool down the investors. Conversely, one may want to not just to send a message of uncertainty in order to cool down the investors, but to try to funnel token sales toward explicit options, which would offer a quite clear legal regime so that investors are confident into the kind of sequel that will be to their investment. So if we look at French law, for instance, in fact, contrary to the US law, where according to the OA test, once you invest your money into a scheme where the value of that investment will be dependent on someone else's action, then it's an investment product, and it must be regulated by the securities law. That is, it is regulated by the Securities and Exchange Commission. So this is a very large definition, a very wide definition of what securities are. Under French and more generally European Union law, according to the Market in Financial Instrument Directive, securities are not every instrument whose value they depend on the action of a third party, but there is only a list of securities, and securities can be basically stocks or bonds or shares in mutual funds, but nothing else. They are and derivative products, I shall add. So tokens might be amenable to one of those legal categories, but it seems that most tokens have been designed in order to evade or not to fit these categories. So we must think of a different category than the category of security. And so we might look at the intrinsic characteristics of every token in order to understand what is the material legal provision which are applicable to every token. And our idea is that, of course, the material legal provisions applicable will depend on the intrinsic characteristics. So, because there is no specific regime for token. And in the paper I sent you, there is a table which in fact try to summarize all the possible regimes, all the possible material applicable provisions. And in fact, the result of our legal analysis is that it is very complex because, and by very complex I mean, if we look at the whole legal constraints which weigh on the tokens, it's complex because the provisions which are applicable to the sale of the token and to the consumer protection are completely distinct from the provision which are applicable to the accounting of token and to the tax regime of the token. So everything has to be taken from various pieces of law, and moreover, we're not entirely sure of how the judge will have to judge because of the technical difficulty of understanding what the token is. But it seems basically that utility tokens on the one hand, community token on the other hand, and security-like token eventually will be eligible to different legal regime and hence will be governed by different legal provisions. Okay. This is, of course, even more difficult if we take into account the fact, which we explained in the beginning, that most tokens offer characteristics from not just one type, which is either utility or community or security, but of some token can be both utility and community token. So the material provision applicable to them should be contradictory or very complex. Moreover, there is one type of token which at the moment we cannot have any idea of how to regulate, and these are the tokens which are connected with DAOs, I mean decentralized autonomous organization. What do we call decentralized autonomous organization? Basically, it's the community of cryptocurrency users, okay? Or the cryptocurrency itself. Because, in fact, the cryptocurrency itself has no article of association, no clear governance, although there are some governance principles. No person is associated to governance, and there is no written articles of association ruling that governance. Okay. Moreover, they do exist in cyberspace. Hence, they should be accessible from any jurisdiction. So one might ask under which condition those very loose organizations can issue tokens. There is already one example, which is the so-called the DAO, which was issued on the Ethereum blockchain in 2016, and by the way, which led to many problems because the DAO was hacked, and so this led to a fork in the Ethereum blockchain. So this problem, in fact, is under scrutiny by the Securities and Exchange Commission, but there is no regulatory perspective at the moment, especially because there is no articles of association, hence no legal form for the DAO. And what might happen in the end is that probably the SEC will take some sanctions against given individual. This is what might happen, but it seems that targeting only individuals when we're talking about more or less legal, structures seems a bit weak, because what we want with all these IT developments is to be able to characterize some new organizational forms. So maybe for this reason, it seems reasonable to think of a specific regime for token sales. Okay. think of a specific regime so that the information which is issued to the investor is somewhat standardized. Okay, so if we look at the literature, there are some authors which try to go through hundreds of ICOs in order to have a general idea of what is happening there. So they have shown that most token sales to date do not mention neither the applicable law, and by applicable law I mean simply which country, nor the legal form of the organization which is involved in the process, whether it's a simple individual, whether it's a company, whether it's a foundation. Okay. In fact, most of the token sales are introduced by people which are talking from the cyberspace, and usually they ask US citizens not to be part of the process because of the special feature of the US legal system, which is that basically the SEC is competent when a US citizen is involved into an investment process wherever on Earth or in the galaxy itself. Okay, because if you're a US citizen and you think you're defrauded by someone in an investment scheme, then you can file a complaint with the SEC, even if the investment happened into the cyberspace, and even if the people who took your money is not in the US. Which is the case of Tezos. Yeah. So while the ubiquitous nature of blockchains make it impossible to localize a token sale in order to apply it a predetermined set of rules, maybe the simplest way to proceed is to offer a one-size-fits-all approach with common disclosure requirements. But of course, you cannot do this if for any ICO, you must have some requirements that guarantee, or at least that indicate that the ICO is honest and really has a purpose of financing project. So the condition we propose is that the tokens do not replicate already existing funding instruments. Okay, that is to say, you cannot use ICO to issue securities or to issue banking products such as bank, credits. Okay, ICO cannot be a token that represents a simple bank credit. Okay, it must be an instrument of its own. So this is to say, the only way we can think of regulating ICOs is if they are clearly distinct from another way of funding the project. And then it only makes sense to regulate this token sale if these tokens are true tokens, that is, if they appear on distributed ledgers which can be publicly accessed. I mean, I say public ledger to say something wider than blockchain, but I mean, a storage protocol that is public, that is universally accessible, that in fact guarantees the ownership and that cannot be destroyed or manipulated. That is to say, it seems only convenient to regulate ICOs and to authorize them if we are really talking about ICOs and not about securities issuance or vouchers sale with a pseudo blockchain. That is to say, we cannot think of them as a way to evade current legal provisions, but only if there is something really new. Okay. So in this perspective, we are proposing changes to the French legal framework for tokens that do not fit into pre-existing categories. And the pre-existing categories of French law are banking operations, securities operations, insurance product, real estate. Okay. So if we are not talking about digital certificates that do represent that kind of good, then we can build a specific regulation for them, because at the moment they are said to be other goods in French law. And there is no specific regime, legal regime for other goods, but there are provisions applicable to intermediary in other goods. Okay, so to those who sell these other goods. The problem is that, in fact, the current law governing intermediaries for other goods is not adapted to token sales, because most token sales are not made by intermediaries, as we have seen, but by the issuer themselves. So it would be strange to call intermediary a guy who is the originator. It would be a source of error. So in the end, a proposition is, well, we propose in French some changes to the existing legal system, but the main idea is to create a specific asset class for tokens which are which are written in a proper distributed ledger, okay, as long as they do not substitute existing assets. So in fact, there are two sets of conditions. So first, they must not replicate an existing asset. This is the one we already said. And then they must be written into a proper distributed ledger. And at the moment, we have no idea of what a proper distributed ledger is. But there have been already two ordinances issued by the Ministry of Economics and Finance stating that when the distributed ledger is proper, then it can be used, and a decree should be issued before July to say what is a proper distributed ledger. So hopefully we will have a legal definition of what a proper distributed ledger is, and hence hopefully our proposition is consistent with the amendments to the legal system which are underway. Okay. So these properly distributed ledger-backed tokens could not be sold by any person, but their initial issuance should be properly documented. Should not, excuse me. On the contrary, these properly distributed ledger-backed tokens, they could be sold by any person. I mean, not just intermediary in other goods, not just intermediary in insurance, not intermediary in banking operations, etc. They could be sold by anyone, but on the condition that there is proper blockchain where the tokens are written, and the blockchain or the distributed ledger also feature proper documentation of those about these tokens. Okay, so in order to implement this regulation, all we need is an ordinance to amend the Code monétaire et financier, and also an amendment of the AMF General Regulation. Okay. So what kind of info do we expect? There is quite a long list, okay? Because we have 13 requirements, such as the identification of the issuers. For the natural person, we expect a report by a third party establishing the managing skills of the managers of the natural person, natural person who are involved into the issuance. A description of the project with a schedule of agenda in the project. It's sort of a business plan, of course. The total number of tokens issued, the modality of the sale procedure, because some token sales feature a pre-sale, and in case of a pre-sale, it means that some people are allowed to buy the tokens at reduced price, and this doesn't smell good, because it looks very much like a scam, that like some people, making money out of those who came after them. So when you see that there is a pre-sale, it means that the people are trying to cash the project before they think it will work. So it is important to be clear about all the procedure for selling all the tokens, the rights granted by the token to the investor, the risk taken by the buyers, etc. So these appear to be quite a long list, but in fact it's far simpler than the prospectus, which is required if you try to issue securities according to the prospectus, the EU Prospectus Directive. I must remind you that, just to give you an order of magnitude, but there has been a consultation by the European Commission about the revision of the Prospectus Directive, and the answers to this consultation have shown that the price range for a prospectus is between 10,000 and 800,000 euros for this is the cost for the prospectus, and the median value is 200,000 euros. So basically, when a firm wants to go to the financial market to issue either bonds or stocks, the entry cost is 200,000 euros, even if the procedure is not to be completed in the end because the investors do not invest. So we see why ICOs are interesting, because prospectus is such a high cost that there is a high risk involved by the companies. So our idea is simply that if we're serious about real tokens that are not replication of financial instruments, then with some requirements, which are basically a disclosure of what the project is and who are the people involved, then we could proceed to the issuance. Okay, so basically we want to know who is selling the token, whether tokens have already been sold, and what will be done with the proceeds of the sale, so that people can check what is happening. And by the way, when we say people can check, the idea is that as the tokens will be written on a blockchain, we can of course in real time see what is happening with the money. Okay, and our recommendation to the Financial Market Authority is to set up a web page, web interface, to see what's happening with the tokens, not just the token issued, but also the tokens which have been taken in the ICO, so that in real time the investor can see what is happening to his money. And this is of course what is possible with blockchain-based technologies. And for this reason, it seems a bit more difficult to steal money from investors, as they can overwatch in real time what is happening to their money. Okay. So maybe 5 last minutes, please. Of course, we should think about anti-money laundering regulation because, well, first, in France or in Europe, it is established that the exchanges, that is the places where you can exchange your cryptocurrencies for fiat money, these are in fact payment services, hence they are regulated entities and they should apply anti-money laundering provisions to their business. Hence, people who buy any cryptocurrencies, they should, using fiat currency, they should apply some anti-money laundering provisions. This is not the case with ICOs, because ICOs are usually performed into cybercurrencies. But it means that the cybercurrencies which are used to buy the tokens, they should be monitored when you buy them. But the experience is that compliance with anti-money laundering regulation vary widely across the spectrum of token sales as they appear to have worked. As we have seen, for instance, in the case of Tomb Raider, the issuer wanted every single investor to be checked in order to be sure that there was no AML problem, while I must confess that most Bitcoin users think that if he buys the Bitcoin from a miner, then the Bitcoin is new and it's clean, then there's no problem and he can use it. Okay, so this is completely crazy, because if the Bitcoin mining is operated by criminals, then of course the Bitcoin are dirty, and they wouldn't fit the anti-money laundering regulation provisions. So the habits of the Bitcoin, of the cryptocurrency community should be changed, because they are, at the moment, most users of cryptocurrencies are not conscious of what anti-money laundering regulation means. But at the moment, the legal provisions about issuance of securities only require that the intermediary provides AML check, and not the issuer itself. So we had to recommend that in the case of token sales, the issuer, hence the guy who sells the token, should accept only cryptocurrencies coming from AML compliant exchanges. At least when we are talking about amounts which are above 1 or 2 bitcoins, or amounts which should be discussed. Okay, but it seems necessary to impose a requirement of anti-money laundering compliance for this token sales procedure. So, apart from this, we see no point in regulating prices, although there is no model for pricing those tokens. We see no point in pricing regulation because we're thinking that investors will do their due diligence and decide how they want to price the product. But it seems very difficult for the authority to endorse a price valuation model. It seems that the only thing the authority could say is that the required information is, and once the required information is provided by the issuer, then the issuance can be reported on the web page with the real-time monitoring of the blockchain. Okay. Probably, or worst problem with this regulation, you might think that there are many problems with the regulation because, of course, it won't prevent any scam at all. Okay, the only way is to provide some transparency, and that's all we try to do. But another problem is simply that it's not compatible with the US securities law, which is that basically one firm could issue tokens in France, some US citizen could buy them, and then try to suit the issuers in front of the US judge or or with the US Securities and Exchange Commission. So that would create a real problem for France, which is that basically we would appear as a tax haven or as a legal haven for the US authority. But this is interesting too because it means in the end that it seems that now, at the moment, you cannot make a piece of financial regulation without aligning on the US regulation. Because if you don't comply, then it means that in the end, the US is deciding for you. So our point is also to propose a light touch regulation, which is basically about information disclosure, not to say that this is the last word about all this, but also to show that there is a problem with the US approach toward regulating financial markets and financial instruments, because basically the US doesn't rely on any other country's legal system. Okay. So, as a summary, we advocate marginal change in the French legal system that would create a generic category for properly distributed ledger-backed tokens, and that regulation should ensure that prospective investors are provided with relevant information. Providing such an unambiguous framework for token sale might help repatriate those token sales from the wild cyberspace, because at the moment ICOs or token sales are operating nowhere, I mean in the cyberspace, into a regulated space where rational decision making and traceability of transactions are possible, enabling first honorable investors to meet promising project holders. Thank you for your attention. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Pierre. Thank you very much. We can start the question answer from Istanbul.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much for the platform. I will be here in Sabah University. First of all, I would like to introduce Professor Ahmed Kulub, the rector of the university is here, and his deputy also, Professor Arif Al-Sol, together with our students and professors who are studying and teaching Islamic economics, banking, finance, and the rest of this subject. And on that basis, they came to know what is the compliance of these ICUs from Islamic perspective. Professor Pierre, also from King University, some of the professors there, some can shed light on how compliant these things from Islamic perspective. And I would like to give maybe Professor Pierre a few things.
Thank you so much, Professor, for your presentation. as I understand, I came late, a little bit late towards the end of your presentation, but as far as I understand, in your presentation, there is no any point of view from Islamic economics perspective, as I understood, but if there is, any approach from that part, I would like to know from your presentation, is there any relation with the approach of Islamic economics and Islamic finance to your presentation? And again, I'd like to thank to the team in Paris, Sorbonne, and also in King Abdulaziz University for the team there in Jeddah. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
I should say something. These cryptocurrencies are not scientific. They are fictional. As Nicholas Oresme said during, I think, 14th century, changing the money value is one of the way of robbing people. By such currencies, unfortunately, many people are robbed. Owing to this reason, there is an international order to arrange this. Bitcoin case is also a way of exploiting and robbing people. According to Islamic economics, money should be defined by real values. Money should be issued according to real values. Otherwise, money, fictional money, symbolic money, will pave the way of exploitation. Owing to this reason, sir, we should discuss this point in detail. That is not a scientific explanation. It is completely an imaginary fact.
Well, maybe before I give the floor to Jeddah, of course there is no Islamic economics perspective, because I expected from you, my good friends, to give it, because I'm not at any rate authorized to talk in the name of Islam. I noticed that during November and September, there have been statements, first by the Turkish Directorate for Religious Affairs on Bitcoin, and then by the Mufti of Al-Azhar in Cairo. These statements were about Bitcoin and cyber currencies, cryptocurrencies. So of course, this statement can be applied to those token sales. But here I have 2 points to make. 2 points to make. First, these statements were not issued or translated in English, so I could not access them. So I'm talking very remotely, and I think it would be a nice thing to translate them so that almost anybody, and especially the non-Muslims, could access these statements, because they are important also for the non-Muslims. And then, it seems to me that, as far as I understood, from indirect references to these statements, that they do not contain legal reasoning about the instrument themselves, but about, as you explained, about the risk of defrauding and robbing people using these as scams. So it is obvious that they have been users of these new things to defraud people. But I'm wondering whether the very cautious approach, which is only to say that these things are new, so basically it's complicated, so it can be used by crooks to extract money from naive and confident people, so we should refrain from using them. That's right. But, you know, saying people, you must be prudent, because basically people can use this to defraud you, and forbidding something is a bit different. In China too, they decided to forbid, because the point is that the Chinese authority fear that the Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies can become a social problem because too many people invest in it. My point here is that the Chinese government is somewhat hypocritical, because on the one hand he says Bitcoin is forbidden, and on the other hand he encourages people to mine Bitcoin, and he encourages Chinese banks to develop their own blockchain. So at some point, my position is just about consistency. I know this can be used to defraud people, but people have to be prudent. And well, I'm just talking about what can be done among prudent people, okay? And most often people get scammed because they think they can make profits without risk, and illegal profits. And the main reason for people to be scammed is that they expect unacceptable profits. So to sum all this up, I'd love to hear an Islamic economics perspective on all this, and I call for you to be part of this, because it seems that authorities are giving a very general speech which can be refined in the interests not just of the Muslim community, but for the whole world.
Dr. Abdurrahim.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. First, before I give you my own point of view about the cryptocurrency,
Can the other sides switch off their mic?
okay.
Put it on mute.
Okay, so before I give the Islamic view about this cryptocurrency, let first be clear about the distinction between the blockchain technology as a technology result on transparent, and this will not make space for somebody want to cheat other, and Bitcoin. So if we are talking about blockchain, we can use it in issuing Islamic currency, cryptocurrency. And let me explain how we can use it when we want to use Islamic finance. Of course, we can use or we can issue this currency in two kind of contracts. One is mudaraba and the other is musharaka. Well, in mudaraba, the one who buys this currency has the right to buy this currency, the commodities, which will be produced and make money out of the cost and the sales price for it. From here we can get a profit. The other one, which is the coin which give the right for the bearing this currency to be a shareholder on this project. So this is just like when we go and float some kind of shares, but in this time we float some currency to cover the capital requirement for certain project. So with blockchain technology, we can assure that this money go to the right place and of course, all the currency holder can watch this operation. The second point about the regulator. We have on our system al-muhtasib. He is a regulator. He can assure that the contract is right and the application is right and nobody cheat other on that. And this company or whatever this project can be reported their financial report to this regulator to be sure everything is right. The conclusion that we can use the blockchain technology to float to this kind of currency, which will be used to finance certain product. Thank you.
Dr. Masum Billah.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Thank you very much, Professor Pierce, for your excellent lecture. Again, I believe this is the second lecture on this cryptocurrency. I have several queries to your lecture. First is, of course, there are some confusion also during your lecture that I have discovered that ICO is is different from the IPO. Of course, the IPO is non-digital and ICO is the digital. Now, how you are going to compare with the sukuk, either the asset-backed or asset-based sukuk, how you're going to compare with these particular two offerings? Now, ICO, when you discuss about ICO is, from your explanation, is more towards the securities, actually. It's not the currency because of, it's just a token to be sold digitally, and then there will be this profit, whatever it is, income, over this coin. So now this particular issue needs to be clarified. Secondly, that ICO is, of course, there are many issues are not being covered yet, and then there is not clear. So that's why my suggestion here that Professor Pierce could conduct a short analysis on this ICO before you come up with any solution. So that's very important. Now, the other issue here that when you discuss about this, again confusion, that ICO is something like regulated, to be regulated by the local law, then who is the sovereign then? Is it the central bank or the Securities Commission or who? Is not clear actually. And it is very important to be clear, otherwise we will open the door for the scammers and also will expose to more money laundering opportunities. So that's also very important, even though you have discussed with the highlighted on AML, means anti-money laundering, and also the acts regulations, but then how we are going to protect or going to ensure the ICO does not involve either local jurisdiction or the international jurisdiction money laundering opportunities. Okay, and then even though you have highlighted on the emphasis on regulatory frameworks, but there is no any model that you have suggested the regulatory frameworks, the guidelines, and the risk factors. So that these two aspects are very important in order for us to ensure that this ICO is free from anti-money laundering or any other scamming or whatever illegal action. So these are the aspects are not clear. Now, when you talk about the ICO can cash out, this is another issue, confusion. Now, what is the PPP then? Purchasing power parity. So it's not clear. So now, again, to sum up here, that when you talk about this ICO, do you suggest that there should be the issuer should be the central bank when you talk about local, or the GLC, or any organization, could be private or could be public or semi-public, okay? So that is not clear here actually. Now, There was a lecture by Dr. Sami Soilem about 2 months ago. He was suggesting that this cryptocurrency shall be treated as a complementary currency, not as a currency as such. So what is your opinion? Now, from Istanbul, the question raised about Islamic, actually, for information, of course, Professor Pierce, he highlighted, and then he needs also some suggestion or some ideas so that he can incorporate in his paper on Islamic input or halal input. For information, I have just to share with you, I have spoken twice in Jeddah also and also in Pakistan on the comprehensive discussion on the halal alternative of cryptocurrency. And the paper is going to be ready very soon. Now, there is another good news that this year a book, comprehensive book, will be contributed by almost 20 the subject experts to be published in 2018, and the book is going to be, inshallah, I'm heading this particular book, is going to be published by Macmillan, Pelgrim, Macmillan, and Springer. Inshallah, we signed the agreement already. Hopefully, this book will be out, and then this book will contribute to the halal solution. The title of the book is going to be Halal Cryptocurrency Management. So this is all about that I'd like to share with you, and I hope Professor Pierce could clarify those are the confusion that I raised is very important. And when we you come up with the comprehensive paper, if you could consider the halal alternative, whatever possible way, so that could contribute better. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum.
Dr. Salah Jarrah.
Yes, good morning, Pierre, and thank you for Pierre Charles. Thank you for coming this early in a very snowy and cold weather in Paris. I'm going to try to take on your invitation about a discussion of your approach from the Islamic law point of view. It is only at the stage of brainstorming and not at the level, of course, of fatwa, for which I'm not, of course, of that level. The law approach in France, in Article 1108 of the Civil Code, is saying the contract, and they are talking about synalagmatic contract, they are either commutative, that means that they have equivalent from both sides to give to each other, or they are what they call in France aléatoire, which is more or less gambling. So since the relationship between the issuer and the investor is of a contractual nature, so it is either on this side or on the other side. Of course, the French law accommodate the gambling kind of contract, which is not the case in the Islamic law, to my knowledge. So that means we are talking about only about synalagmatic contract, which are have an equivalent from obligation from each part of the contract. And here, of course, we are getting out any unilateral contract which is for social aim or whatever. Somebody will give something without getting in return something equivalent. Now, once that is done, then we are having a problem very well known into the contract law in every system, which we call in English categorization, in French qualification, and in Islamic law, takhrij al-manat. That means that we have to qualify the kind of contract depending on what are the aspect and the description of the project. And in this way, it could be either forbidden or either allowed. And if it is allowed, then we will go into the details from the Islamic law point of view of how to build the contract and what are the conditions and so on and so forth. Now I have a suggestion for which I'm getting back to your approach, and I would like to have your opinion in a suggestion for an alternative approach to the one that you presented. We might have a legal approach saying, let's go into the American way and broaden the existing laws, and then give all the power to the controlling bodies. And the controlling bodies will have the flexibility and the rapidity to react, so they can qualify the contract and in which category it is and under which law it would be. By the way, I think the number 2 and number 3 in your table, they are considered in most law system as securities, so they are in the same category. And thank you.
Dr. Ahmed.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. First of all, thank you very much, Dr. Pierre, for sharing with us these concerns in order to pave the way for legislation to take place in France for these new, phenomenons. As I understood from your presentations and a few readings, that ICOs are more, used as vehicles for investment and fundraising, fundraising instruments in order, not through the ordinary, that is through intermediation. This is very, very important. And so there is, I think, from the examples and the few data that you have provided, there is a potential, okay? That it means they can expand the horizons to people to find alternative ways of more efficient way of fundraising and investing. So this is one aspect which has to be taken into consideration if we would like to take, or to look into the Islamic perspectives. So it is not at this stage wise to go the way, to say it is forbidden or it is allowed, but it is to scrutinize the situation very carefully and to weigh things between what are the benefits and the harms. That is the masalih and the mafasid of these new schemes. So I think it is really, there is a potential, but one has to be very, very careful. And I think the way he is suggesting, Dr. Pierre, for instance, for the French to benefit, or for the French community to benefit from these schemes, is that the watchdog in France to open a dialogue and to look how to legislate for it. So this will minimize the concerns and the risks that have been already said, that the scams, the bubble, the deception, and so on and so forth. And this, if they are, done in any law, that will really increase the Islamicity, between two brackets, of these schemes. But as I said, one has to be very careful. So, but my suggestion to you to widen the horizon, Prof. Pierre, is, I think, since you have mentioned community tokens, there are already community schemes, or what is called the complementary currency schemes, and they have been existing since the 30s, at least as far as I know, and they are working for the benefit of the community, local community, as Dr. Prof. Bernard Lieti, in his book, The Future of Money, he said that most of the central banks, they do not, if these schemes, they work not under the regulation, not through intermediaries, they are hostile to them. But he cited an example that in New Zealand, I think recently, they have adopted and they found that they have allowed for complementary scheme to work in New Zealand because they found it is fruitful, it is good for social, for investment, for employment purposes. So I'd like to draw your attention to this. And finally, 2 or 3 days ago, the UEA, that is United Arab Emirates, market watchdog and regulator has raised alarm over the initial coin offering, that is ICO's investments. So this is probably because they said that there are, I think, some token-based fundraising activities working or allowed in the United Arab Emirates. And also in Dubai, in October, they have raised also alarming. So these two things, that is the example of New Zealand in allowing complementary scheme to work, and also the concern or to look into what's taking place in the United Arab Emirates of legislating and warning at the same time of some schemes of the ICOs. And thank you very much for what you have provided us.
Thank you, Dr. Pierre, and thank you, Dr. Ahmed, and all. We are done from Jeddah, back to France now.
Well, good friends, thank you for all these insights and questions. First, I definitely buy Salah's approach, which is we're at the brainstorming stage, and I must confess, I like this approach since I could not contribute any further to Islamic economics reflection. I'm happy to be at the brainstorming stage, and then I will shut my trap and listen to the rest. Then, Ahmed, thank you for making clear that the point about the complementary money. The point is that complementary money are authorized under French law since 2014, under what we call the Loi sur l'économie solidaire et sociale. But the problem with digital tokens is that they are, when we try to do some complementary money, usually it's a local money which is worth in an area where people know themselves and they do have some confidence into one another. The point with digital tokens is that the definition of local is not the same because we're talking about cyberspace, and although the cyberspace can be some kind of space, it's the locality of it is larger than true complementary money. And we have seen how Bitcoin evolved from what was at the beginning a complementary money between IT freaks into a bubble and something which is out of reason. So of course, this is why you're completely right in saying that we must be very prudent in all this and watch before we issue statements, of course. But the point is that, in fact, it is difficult to generalize what is done about complementary money to digital tokens, since digital tokens are bubble prone in some respects, because people are, those who want to make money out of anything, they try to make money out of this, and so it derails the community orientation of complementary token. Now, to try to take back Salah's drive toward categorization of instruments, well, if I might, I would like to say that the so-called contrats aléatoires, hence random contracts, are not entirely gambling, Salah. Because if you look at the Code Civil, the Code Civil states that the the random contracts are, of course, there is waging and gambling, but there are also operations which are distinguished from gambling. That is, for instance, providing life annuities and providing for insurance. I know that under Islamic law, it looks like gambling, but, well, we have some reason to think it doesn't work exactly like gambling. The reason is simply that it's regulated. So there were times in France where gambling was forbidden, and there were times where some kinds of gambling authorized, and there are also that old Roman approach toward gambling, which is that basically the law has nothing to do with gambling. I'm not saying that this is right. I'm just trying to point out that some random contracts are eligible to material legal provisions which are very different from gambling, because they are regulated so that the customer is not robbed like it can be the case with gambling. But then I have nothing more to say about your approach, which seems to me extremely wise, and I'd be glad if you write it down so that I can think of it a bit more. Now, I would like to go back to the gentleman who told me about the book which is about to be issued about halal cryptocurrency management. I look forward to this book, because it will be a blockbuster here. I hope that you will present the book in the seminar. It will probably attract people, simply because, you know, the simple title, Halal Cryptocurrency Management, will be a great success here. And then I'm just wondering, this is only an effect of my ignorance, but I'm just wondering whether they are at the moment some crowdfunding platform which fits into Islamic law, such as crowd mudaraba or crowd musharaka. Because why not use funding platform such as Kickstarter in order to enable Islamic financing contracts? You know, you can do a Kickstarter project through a mudaraba, where a guy will be the mudarib, and all the funders that take part into the platform will be the Rab al-Mal. So I don't know whether this does exist and whether this will be legally qualified, but I think there's something that, if we start talking about this, it will be great success here. The same applies for crowd musharaka, and I still don't know whether this does work at the moment, and what legal subtleties there will be, but I would be glad to hear about this, and I think it will be met with enthusiasm on this side of the conference. Well, this is all I can answer at the moment. Do we have questions in Paris? Maybe some questions or comments from the ladies section isn't with us anymore.
Yeah. Any question from Istanbul before we close?